Imagine holding two royal coins from two of England's most powerful monarchs, the Henry VIII Sovereign from 1526 and the Elizabethan Sovereign from 1584. Both carry the story of a changing England, but which one is truly more remarkable? Welcome to Eagle Numismatics, where we uncover the history, rarity, and hidden stories behind extraordinary coins. Today, we are putting these two legendary sovereigns head to head. Stay with us, because the differences between them may surprise you. Henry VIII Sovereign 1526. Imagine holding a piece of gold that was created almost 500 years ago during the reign of one of the most famous kings in English history. This is the Henry VIII Sovereign from the second coinage of 1526 for collectors. This is much more than an old gold coin. It is a remarkable piece of Tudor history that connects royal power, religion, economics, and early English craftsmanship. Henry VIII became King of England in 1509 after the death of his father Henry V. He was ambitious, educated, and determined to make England a powerful European kingdom. By 1526, Henry had already ruled England for 17 years, and the country was entering an important period of political and economic change. The sovereign itself had been introduced during the reign of Henry VII in 1489. It was a prestigious gold denomination created to represent the wealth and authority of the English monarchy. 1526 issue belongs to Henry VIII's second coinage, which began during an important monetary reform. The sovereign weighed approximately 15.55 grams and was struck in extremely fine gold of about 995 fineness. That means it contained approximately 99.5% gold. Its large size is also impressive. It measured roughly 42 millimeters across, making it much larger than the modern British sovereign that collectors know today. The coin was produced using the hammered method. This means a prepared piece of gold was placed between engraved dies and struck with the hammer. Because of this traditional process, the coin can have an irregular shape, uneven edges, and areas where the design is not perfectly centered. For collectors, these characteristics are important because they can be completely normal for an authentic Tudor hammered coin. A look at the obverse. Henry VIII is shown seated and crowned. He holds the orb and scepter, which represent royal authority. The powerful seated portrait was designed to communicate strength, legitimacy, and sovereignty. Surrounding Latin inscription identifies Henry as King of England and France and Lord of Ireland. The reference to France reflects the long-standing English royal claim to the French crown. Religious wording also reminds us that this coin was created before Henry VIII broke with Rome. That historical detail is extremely important. In 1526, England was still officially Catholic. Henry had not yet become head of the Church of England. The famous religious and political transformation of his reign would come later. So this sovereign captures Henry VIII before some of the most dramatic events of his life. The reverse is equally fascinating. It features the royal arms together with Tudor symbolism, including the famous Tudor rose. Tudor rose represented the union of the houses of Lancaster and York. After the Wars of the Rose, it became one of the strongest symbols of Tudor legitimacy. The reverse also carries a Latin religious inscription connected with the Gospel of Luke. This combination of royal and Christian imagery shows how closely monarchy and religion were connected in Tudor England. The coin was also part of a major monetary reform in 1526. The sovereign was revalued as part of an attempt to bring English coin values more closely into line with important continental currencies. Its official value was increased to 22 shillings and later to 22 shillings and 6 pence during the same year. This tells us that the sovereign was not simply a beautiful object, it was part of a changing economic system. The high gold purity is another major attraction for collectors. Second coinage belongs to the period before the Great Debasement of Henry VIII. Later during the Great Debasement, the precious metal content of much English coinage was reduced. That makes the earlier high-purity sovereign particularly interesting to collectors who study Tudor monetary history. But how valuable is a genuine Henry VIII sovereign from this period? There is no single answer. Value depends on authenticity, condition, strike quality surfaces, variety, provenance, and collector demand. A beautiful, genuine example can be worth many times the value of its gold content. Some high-quality examples have sold for tens of thousands of dollars at major auctions, but collectors should never assume that every coin described as a Henry VIII sovereign has the same value. Authentication is essential. The weight, diameter, gold composition, portrait, lettering, shield design, and overall hammered fabric should all be ex-eminenta. Coin simply looking old does not prove that it is genuine. Modern reproductions and sophisticated counterfeits exist. This is why valuable Tudor gold should ideally be examined by an experienced specialist or reputable grading and authentication service. Condition is also extremely important. Collectors look for strong portrait detail, clear lettering, attractive surfaces, and minimal damage. However, hammered coins should not be judged by modern coin standards. Irregular edges and uneven strikes can be normal characteristics of the original manufacturing process. Collectors should also avoid aggressive cleaning. Original surfaces are generally much more desirable than artificially polished ones. One of the greatest attractions of this coin is its historical connection. Think about the world in which this sovereign was created. There were no modern banks, as we know them, no photografino, televisiano, internet yet. The image of the king could travel across England through coins every time this sovereign changed hands. The royal portrait traveled with ith coin was therefore both money and a powerful symbol of royal authority. Today, it gives collectors a direct physical connection to Tudor England. It was made during the lifetime of Henry VIII. It belongs to a period before the English Reformation, before the Great Debasement, and before many of the events that would define the later part of Henry's reign. That is what makes the Henry VIII Sovereign from 1526 so fascinating. It is not simply an old gold coin. It is a historical document. It represents Tudor power. It reflects religious beliefs. It records monetary reform. It demonstrates early minting technology, and it preserves the image of one of the most famous monarchs in English history. For collectors, the real treasure is the combination of gold rarity, craftsmanship, and historia. Genuine Henry VIII Sovereign allows us to look directly into the world of 16th century England. Nearly 500 years later, the gold has survived. The royal imagery has survived. The inscriptions have survived, and most importantly, the story has survived. That is the true fascination of the Henry VIII Sovereign from 1526. Elizabethan Sovereign 1584. Imagine holding a gold coin created during the reign of one of the most famous queens in English history. This is the Elizabethan Sovereign from the late Tudor period. For collectors, this is far more than an old gold coin. It is a remarkable piece of Elizabethan history connected to royal power, religious change, economic reform, and the remarkable growth of England. Elizabeth I became Queen of England in 1558 after the death of her half-sister Mary. Her reign would last for 45 years and become one of the most important periods in English history. By 1584, Elizabeth had already ruled for more than 25 years. England was becoming more confident. Internationalizing, exploration was expanding, trade was growing, and the Elizabethan age was developing into one of the most famous periods of the Tudor dynasty. The sovereign belongs to the Elizabethan gold coinage and represents the continued importance of high-value gold money during her reign. The sovereign denomination itself had a long history. It had originally been introduced under Henry VII. In 1489, Henry VIII continued the denomination, and Elizabeth I inherited this important royal tradition. But Elizabethan coinage was very different from the coinage of her father. The religious and political world had changed dramatically. Elizabeth came to the throne after the religious turmoil of Henry VIII, Edward VI, and Mary. Her reign established a Protestant settlement in England. That change is reflected in the imagery and inscriptions found on Elizabethan coinage. Its sovereign is particularly interesting because it combines royal authority with strong religious symbolism. The obverse, Elizabeth is presented as the powerful monarch. Her royal portrait communicates authority, legitimacy, and continuity. Image of the Queen on the coin was not simply decoration. Coins were one of the most effective ways for a monarch to place an official image into the hands of ordinary people. Every transaction could carry the image of the queen across the kingdom. The portrait therefore helped reinforce Elizabeth's authority. Inscriptions also identify Elizabeth through her royal titles. They connect her authority with the English crown and with the religious identity of the kingdom. The reverse carries important royal and Christian symbols. The design includes the royal arms and other elements that reinforce the authority of the Tudor monarchy. For collectors, the details of the portrait, lettering, shield, and surrounding symbols are extremely important. Elizabethan hammered gold coins were produced using traditional minting methods. A prepared gold blank was placed between engraved dies and struck with a hammer. Because of this process, the coins can have a regular sharpest strike, may be slightly uneven, some lettering may be weaker than other areas, and the edge may not be perfectly uniform. These characteristics are important to understand because modern collectors sometimes mistake normal hammered coin features for damaging. Authentic Elizabethan sovereign should be judged according to the technology of its own period. The date 1584 is also historically fascinating. Elizabeth had been queen for more than 25 years. England was now firmly under her rule, but the country was surrounded by religious and political tension. Relations with Catholic powers remained difficult. Spain was becoming an increasingly important rival, and England was moving toward the major international conflicts that would eventually produce the famous Spanish Armada campaign. The sovereign therefore belongs to a period when England was becoming a stronger international power. Elizabethan England was also experiencing cultural development. Literature, theater, exploration, science, and trade were all expanding. This was the world associated with William Shakespeare and other famous figures of the Elizabethan age. Sovereign provides a physical connection to that world. When collectors examine an Elizabethan gold coin, they are looking at an object that existed during the same historical period that produced some of the most famous cultural achievements in English history. The economic story is equally important. Elizabeth inherited a complicated monetary system. Earlier Tudor governments had reduced the precious metal content of some coins during the Great Debasement. Elizabeth later carried out important reforms to restore confidence in English money. Her coinage reforms helped improve the quality and consistency of the currency. Gold coins remained important as high-value money. The sovereign therefore represents the relationship between royal authority and monetary stability. For collectors, the gold content is only one part of the story. Historical value can be far greater than the bullion value. The exact value of an Elizabethan sovereign depends on its authenticity. Specific type of varietic interest, quality, surface preservation, rarity. Collector demand a genuine, high-quality example can be extremely valuable, but collectors should never rely on the word rare. Underneath, exact variety must be identified. This is especially important with hammered Elizabethan coins, because small differences in design and inscriptions can separate different issues. Collectors should examine the portrait, the crown, lettering, royal arms, the weight, the diameter, and the overall fabric of the coin. Authentication is essential because valuable historical gold coins can attract sophisticated counterfeits. A coin that simply looks old is not automatically genuine. Metal must be consistent. The weight must make sense. Design must match the correct period, and the manufacturing characteristics should be appropriate for a 16th century hammered coin. This is why experienced collectors often use specialist references and professional authentication services. Condition is another major factor. Strong portrait detail is desirable. Clear legends are desirable. A well-preserved royal shield is desirable, and original surfaces can make a major difference. Collectors generally prefer coins that have not been aggressively cleaned. A bright, polished surface may actually reduce the historical appeal and market desirability of an important hammered coin. Irregular shape of the coin can also be part of its character. Unlike modern machine-struck coins, the Elizabethan sovereign was created using traditional hand striking. This means no two coins have to look perfectly identical. The production process itself becomes part of the history. Imagine the workers in the Royal Mint preparing precious gold blanks. Metal had to meet Official standards the dies had to be engraved the blank, had to be positioned and the hammer had to deliver the correct strike at the finished coin. Then entered the monetary system of Elizabethan England. It could have been held by merchants while the individual official members of the upper classes. Gold coins were high-value objects and could function as stores of wealth. Some may have been saved, some may have been passed through generations, others may have been lost or hidden. Every surviving example therefore has its own storied connection between Elizabeth and her coinage is especially powerful. Elizabeth was a female monarch ruling in a world dominated by male rulers. Her coins presented her as the legitimate sovereign. Royal portrait was a statement of authority. It told the kingdom and the wider world that Elizabeth was not simply occupying the throne, was the monarch. The symbolism helped establish continuity after years of religious and political instability. This is one reason Elizabethan coinage is so important to historians and collectors. It shows how a monarch used money to communicate political identity. The coin also represents the strength of the Tudor dynasty near the end of its existence. Elizabeth was the last Tudor monarch, never married and left no direct heir. When she died in 1603, the Tudor dynasty ended. The crown passed to James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. That means an Elizabethan sovereign is connected to the final chapter of Tudor royal history. The 1584 issue comes from the middle of Elizabeth's long reign. Was created during a period when her government was becoming more established. England was increasingly active in international trade and exploration, and the Queen was building the reputation that would later make her one of the most celebrated rulers in English history. For collectors, this historical timing is extremely attractive. The coin is old enough to belong to the world of early modern Europe, but it also belongs to an age that strongly shaped the identity of England. The sovereign is therefore a meeting point between monetary history and royal history. The gold represents wealth, portrait represents monarchy, royal arms represent political authority, religious imagery represents the changing faith of England, and the hammered fabric represents the technology of the periodony. Small coin can preserve all of these stories. Another important point for collectors is provenance. A documented history of ownership can add historical interest. If a coin can be traced through respected collections or auction records, its story becomes stronger. Overver, collectors should distinguish between documented provenance and an attractive story without evidence. Research and documentation are extremely important when dealing with valuable historical coins. Auction records can also help collectors understand the market, but prices vary greatly depending on the exact type and condition. A heavily worn or damaged coin may have a very different value from a rare example with strong detail and excellent surface. This is why collectors should identify the exact variety before attempting to estimate value. Best approach is to identify first, authenticate, second, assess condition, third, and value, fourth. This simple process can prevent many expensive mistakes. The Elizabethan sovereign from 1584 is especially interesting when compared with the VIII Sovereign from 1526. Both belong to the Tudor dynasty. Both are associated with royal gold coinage. Both carry the power of the English monarchy, but they represent very different moments in Tudor history. Henry VIII ruled during the early and middle Tudor period. His reign was defined by religious transformation, political conflict, and dramatic monetary change. Elizabeth ruled during the final great chapter of the Tudor dynasty. Her reign was associated with Protestant stability, cultural development, international expansion, and growing English confidence. The two coins therefore tell a story of transformation. Henry VIII Sovereign represents an England before the English Reformation. Elizabethan Sovereign represents an England shaped by that transformation. Difference between the two coins is not simply the monarch, it is the changing country behind them. That is what makes Tudor coin collecting so fascinating. A collector can hold two pieces of gold and see more than portraits. They can see two different political worlds, two different religious environments, two different stages of economic development, and two different chapters in the history of England. The Elizabethan sovereign is therefore more than a precious metal object. It is a historical document from the Elizabethan age. It connects collectors with the world of Tudor England, a world of royal courts, religious conflict, internation, rivariac la portion, expanding English influence. Then you look at the coin, remember that it was created during the lifetime of Elizabeth. It existed more than 4 centuries ago. It was part of the monetary system of her kingdom, and it carried her authority in physical form. That is the true fascination of the VIII Sovereign from 1584. It is not simply an old gold coin, it is a surviving piece of the final great Tudor age, a coin that connects royal power with historian, a remarkable treasure for collectors who want to hold a genuine piece of Elizabethan England.